Good morning. We now are going to have a talk by Joe Stiglitz on the issue of the youth bulge, the subject of our day. I think probably everybody in this room has heard or read something that Joe has written or spoken. He is a very, very prominent figure on the world stage. An advisor to governments all over the world, an advisor to NGOs, to people who think about global issues. His background is, there's no need to go through it. Of course, he won a Nobel Prize, and he was a chief economist at the World Bank and chair of the economic advisors in the White House. Joined this faculty in 2000, has had a very big impact here, follows a long line of very distinguished people in the economics department and in global issues. One of the things Joe did, we set up a committee on global thought to try to encourage faculty both to think about global issues but also to provide a place for non-traditional people to join the Columbia faculty, and that's been very successful. He was the founding member for that, founding chair. So Joe's a real person on the international stage and a great person here at Columbia. I think the main thing I would say is that every time you talk to Joe, you learn something, and you always learn it in a context where there's good humor and there's a real sense of wanting to have an exchange. He's a forceful advocate. He gets away with enormously controversial statements because he's so charming. I'm constantly getting calls from distinguished people and powerful people who say, "Can't you control this guy?" And of course I say I will. And then we work on it. Anyway, he's a real, really interesting mind. And it's great that he would be here this morning to begin this discussion. Joe.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, although I never thought I ever said anything controversial. Maybe that's why I can get away with it. Well, anyway, the subject of this today's discussion, the youth bulge, I want to put it into a little bit broader context. Which is the impact of demographics, because as some of your notes that you wrote in response indicated, in some countries there is a youth bulge, but in other countries it's going the other way. And the general point is that demography, the changing demographic composition, is going to have an impact on almost all countries. And in some countries, it's going to be a youth bulge. In some countries, it's going to be a youth shortage. But we have to, in one way or another, deal with this changing demography. The youth bulge is particularly serious, of course, in Africa, and a continent where there was already enormous challenges to developing their educational system, and so it compounds the problems there, and that's true of a number of the other countries that are today facing the youth bulge. What I want to first make a couple of just very broad comments about how demography, the change in demography, has some very big effects on our economy, our society, that in one way or another have to be taken into account, and particularly by educational institutions. One aspect that's actually a very positive aspect is that the dynamic nature of an economy is related to the fraction of young people in the population. that one of the things you can think of, you're all used to thinking of companies having old equipment or new equipment. And a company that has new equipment is going to be more dynamic, more able to face that vicissitudes of the economy. Well, the same thing is true about human capital as it is about physical capital. And this is probably even more true in a context of the very fast changes in technology. So the natural way that younger people interact through Facebook, through IT, has given them a kind of networking capacity that is very different from older people. So the positive side of a youth bulge is that the economies that have this younger demography have the opportunity to be, are likely to be actually much more dynamic, much more lively societies. Of course, for those of us who have a more aging society, that's a problem. Because we worry about ossification, having the people making decisions being people that are a little bit out of tune with the new technologies and with the bulk of the population, which are the younger people coming along. There's another problem that is becoming increasingly important in those economies, which are most of the economies of the world, where where there are serious problems of unemployment. Because some people occupy jobs, and some people want to occupy the jobs that other people occupy. Namely, the young people would like to get some of the jobs that are presently held by us. And that's an uncomfortable position for those of us who want to have our jobs occupied by others. But there's a broader issue of distribution that comes in when it gets reflected, for instance, in the United States, where if you have a housing bubble, which is a thing that we had in the United States and a number of other countries had, young people today don't have the wealth to buy houses in the way that young people 30, 40 years ago. A very large fraction of young people in the United States now are living with their parents. Very big change in patterns of living. And this is beginning to raise a whole set of, you might call, intergenerational issues, intergenerational equity issues. In economies like Spain, where there's been some rigidities in the labor market, these problems can get very highly focused, because young people see a lack of opportunity because old people are occupying the positions, not only of power, but also just the plain jobs. And the result of this is that in a country like Spain, the youth unemployment rate now is, the official statistics report the youth unemployment rate around 43%. But when you adjust those statistics to take account of the fact that large numbers of people have dropped out of the labor force, a large number of younger people stop looking for a job because there aren't any, and in the unemployment statistics, you don't count somebody who is not looking for a job as unemployed. Of course, they're not employed, but they're not treated as unemployed. And if you make that adjustment, the youth unemployment rate in Spain today is over 50%. And that's obviously a serious problem, not only for the youth, but I think for Spanish society. And there are similar problems in some of the other countries of Europe, like Ireland, that are facing economic downturn. So if we go back to the Arab Spring, to the protests in Tunisia that brought out, that began the Arab Spring, most people have commented that one of the factors was the high level of youth unemployment, the lack of opportunity, the lack of hope, in many cases, of getting a job. But there's another factor that also played an important role, and that was access to the jobs that were there were viewed as unfair. Those who had connections had a higher probability of getting a job, regardless of whether they were the ones who did best in school. And so this issue of equity is an extraordinarily important one. And the concerns about equity have resonated around the world. They were part of the Indignados movement in Spain and part of the Occupy Wall Street. What motivated those protests were not just a lack of jobs, slow economic growth, but also a sense that there was something unfair about our societies, and that our political system not only wasn't our economic system functioning as it should, but our political system wasn't addressing the problems both of the economy, the economic function, and of the underlying inequities in our society. The reason why I want to emphasize both of these is because when it comes to universities, universities are one of the mechanisms by which we give opportunity to those who otherwise wouldn't. And I think it's going to be very incumbent on universities to try to create fair access to places in the university, and then to play a role in making sure there's fair access to the labor market after people graduate. But before talking about that, I want to talk a little bit more about the unemployment problem that is facing many countries around the world. As you all know, whenever the unemployment rate goes up, almost always it's the youth unemployment rate that goes up much more. So that in the United States, the youth unemployment rate has typically been twice the level of that of the average unemployment. And that's the same thing in Spain and many other countries. That means, of course, that from the point of view of national economic policy, it is imperative to try to work to get the unemployment rate down. That is the first order. It's very hard to deal with youth unemployment if you aren't dealing with the overall level of unemployment. It's going to be very difficult in the current context to deal with that problem in the United States and Europe. It's easier to deal with the problem in China and some of the more dynamic of the of the emerging markets. But even in countries that are growing very rapidly, like India, which was growing at 9% and now growing around 7%, the problem is that the growth in employment hasn't always kept pace with the growth of GDP. And that again leads to the problem of opportunities for young people. So let me talk just a minute about why I think there is this problem of unemployment and why it's become so pervasive, and particularly, as I say, youth unemployment. For the United States and Europe, the fundamental problem is lack of aggregate demand. We've not managed our economy well, and in Europe it's even worse because they are cutting back in government support, and that will lead to a lower level of aggregate demand, a higher level of unemployment. Europe has already entered into a double-dip recession, and while the leaders of Europe keep talking about optimism, I think they are really set on a course that is likely to make things significantly worse. if they didn't get worse, it would be necessitate our really rethinking some of our economics. So from an academic point of view, the likelihood that things will turn out well out of this particular austerity venture is very low. Even the United States, though, has been engaged in austerity. The number of public employees now is about 1 million lower than it was at the beginning of the recession. So while in our textbooks we always say the government is supposed to make up for the deficiency in the private sector, in fact, government has been exacerbating the problem. And unfortunately, the politics in the United States are not likely to make this, to reverse this. The real risk is that it will get actually worse. So this problem of unemployment, and therefore of youth unemployment, is going to be with us for, I think, some time. There'll be a little, you'll read in the newspaper something about green shoots, manufacturing is increasing. Yeah, it's true, manufacturing is about 10% of the labor force. So a little bit increase in manufacturing is a good thing, but is not going to solve our economy's problem. And the fundamental issue is that what kept the economy going before the crisis was a real estate bubble that helped support a consumption boom. Savings rate in the United States went down to 0. That was not sustainable, and it wasn't sustained. And now it's up to 4.5% or 5%, and it's likely to remain there. Every once in a while, somebody in the administration or the Fed will say the consumer's coming back. Not likely to happen, and we shouldn't hope it happens, because that would be irresponsible consumption. And the other part was to say the real estate bubble, 40% of all investment was in real estate, but we overbuilt. And so now we have a problem of a legacy of an overhang of excess housing. The good thing was that the houses were very shoddily built, and they won't last that long. So the normal length of time might be 20 or 30 years. This won't last quite as long, but it will still take a long time. And that's why it's more than deleveraging that's at stake. Even after deleveraging, the economy is likely to remain weak. We may start to grow at even 3%, 3.5%, but that's not fast enough to make a dent in the 23 million or 25 million Americans who would like a full-time job and can't get one. And so even if we grow, it won't be enough to really reverse the problems. So that's what's happening in the United States and Europe. On the side of China and India, in both of these, there's a growth slowdown. A lot of them, there was a lot of discussion of a hard landing. I think that's not true. And a lot of discussion, worry, sort of long phases as growth slowed from 9 to 7%, as if it was the end of the world. Anybody from America or Europe, if somebody said that we could grow at 7%, we would be jumping for joy. And it shows you how your view of what is good or bad is affected by your history. 7% is very impressive economic growth. And part of the discussion in China, for instance, is that it's more important to have, you might call, high-quality growth, sustainable growth, equitable growth, than to have very rapid, unbalanced growth. And so in many ways, one should welcome the slowdown. But particularly in India, where there was a problem of keeping up the growth, the problem of jobs for, the growth wasn't fast enough for creating enough jobs for people moving from the rural area to the urban area. That slowdown presents an even greater challenge. One of the reasons that there has been such problems in job growth in many of the emerging markets is that one of the sectors where they've been very successful, in China, for instance, is manufacturing. But manufacturing has been experiencing enormous productivity increases. And the result of that is that even if output is going up very rapidly, jobs are not being created. So one of the things that most people don't realize is that manufacturing jobs in China are now lower than they were a decade ago. There is no growth in manufacturing jobs in China, even though output of manufacturing has been growing significantly. That's an important warning or important point for economies all over the world, many of whom seek to become larger in manufacturing. There will, I think, be a movement from China to other countries in manufacturing, but even though as wages in China go up, even though there is that movement of output, the number of jobs that are going to be created will be very limited. The global economy today is a service sector economy. For those of us in education, that's a good thing. Education, health, tourism, culture, all kinds of things like that. We are moving into a service sector economy. And that will be true not only of the advanced industrial countries, but increasingly also of emerging markets. That's important as we think about what kinds of skills, what kinds of education we ought to be delivering to our students. So the economy, and this is really, I'm going to come back to this, the economy in both the advanced industrial countries, but even in the emerging markets, is going to be going through rapid restructuring. And we have to teach the skills, kind of education that will enable students to meet the new structures of the economy that will be emerging. The final preliminary point I want to make before I turn to the role of the university in a little bit more detail is the issue of aspirations, of what kinds of jobs that people seek. And that's a real problem in many countries, in the Middle East, but in other places, where you see it very vividly in these countries, where you have high unemployment, but at the same time, large immigrant populations. You have economies where there are jobs, but the people in the country don't want those jobs, and they ask people from other countries to take the jobs that they don't want. So you have this mixture of economies with high levels of unemployment and high levels of immigrants coming in. And that, I think, has to do with aspirations of what are viewed to be acceptable and good jobs. And that problem goes back, I think, to education, not just well before the university, and even to our societal values. Some countries faced up to the problem, or at least begun to talk about it, and realized that, for instance, that at the elementary and middle and secondary school, education is oriented to urban jobs, moving people from the rural to the urban sector. But in many developing countries, 70% of the people live in the agricultural rural sector, and that will probably be true. It will, even in 20 years, it will be 50%. So if you've trained everybody to the mindset that they have to get, the only good jobs are urban jobs, if your whole education system is oriented to focusing on good urban jobs, it's not likely that there are going to be enough good urban jobs for all the people aspiring and going through the education system. So I think we have to think, we have to think a lot about how do we get people to accept that there are good jobs that are very different from the ones that have traditionally been the ones they aspire to. Civil service jobs, or everybody would like to run all the large corporations, be president of everything. But an economy needs workers, and one has to somehow deal with that. That is a particular problem in the United States. I think will be a particular problem in the United States for young men. I think there's gender issues that are going to become increasingly important. The reason why I say that is, in the United States, there's been a hollowing out of the middle-class jobs that went to young men, the jobs in manufacturing, the jobs in construction. And what I've described, those two sectors of the economy are being hollowed out. And wages are going down, the number of jobs are disappearing. And the jobs that are going to be available are going to be very different kinds of jobs. And the young men will have to, if they want employment, will have to accept those. Well, let me now talk for a few minutes about the role of the university in all of this. As I say, obviously, universities are absolutely essential in preparing young people for the labor market. They also play a very important role in what we call the wealth dynamics. One of the concerns that Occupy Wall Street raised was the high level of inequality, the fact that the upper 1% in the United States garners for itself about 20% of all the income and has about 40% of all the wealth. But even more troubling is the fact that not only has the United States become the most unequal of all the advanced industrial countries, but it's also become the country with the least opportunity. The likelihood of the United States likes to think of itself as the land of opportunity. Horatio Alger, I don't know if you know the stories of how people brought themselves up by the bootstraps, are sort of, 100 books were written about Horatio Alger stories. They are an important part of America's sense of identity, but the data show it's a myth. America has the least opportunity of all the advanced industrial countries. And the reason for that almost surely has to do with education. Our education system has been providing less opportunity for those who are less affluent. And that comes because, for a whole variety of reasons, we can talk about that. It goes back to elementary and high school, that the highly selective universities like Columbia have needs-blind admission. They say anybody can get admitted no matter what the income of your parents, and we'll pay for the difference. It's a remarkable statement, and it's a remarkable commitment that they've provided. But the fact of the matter is that the students who make it to getting the good SAT scores, the good high schools, the good performance, are overwhelmingly in the upper 20% of our population. The fraction in the bottom 50% is minuscule. And that's even after efforts to correct that imbalance. And so we have to realize that we have this problem of what I call wealth dynamics in the United States, but that's true in other countries as well. And unless we counter it, it could get worse. And if we don't counter it, there's an interaction between what I call adverse wealth dynamics and increasing inequality in our society. And that leads to the problem that I said in the beginning, a sense that the system is unfair. And when you have societies that are unfair, with high level of unemployment, you have a recipe for instability. Now, one of the particular problems, I'll talk about just a few particular problems now facing universities. One of the particular problems facing universities in the context of high levels of unemployment is that there's pressure for skill-based education. And Columbia College, I went to Amherst College. These are schools that have been committed to a liberal arts education, a very broad education. I believe that those kind of broad education is very important for adapting to a very quickly changing economy and society. But the students are typically more short-sighted. They want the skills to be able to get the jobs right away. And so I think one of our challenge will be to meet the demands of the students to have skill-based education, but to do it at the same time provided them with at least a core of the liberal arts education that has, I think, the foundations of long-run success. The second broad issue that all of us are going to be facing is that education is a service sector. And it's a high-skill service sector. Wages and costs increase faster than have been increasing in the United States and in many other countries, much faster than median income. And that's even worse in the United States because public support has been diminishing. And that's also true in many European countries. That means that there is an increasing problem of access. So the cost of education is going up faster than median income, and that means that people at the bottom will have less and less opportunity for getting the education that they need. Well, that puts a very heavy burden on universities to think about how they can control costs. And, you know, they try all variety of ways. I mean, it's a major issue. But basically, the way we deliver education hasn't changed a great deal. And, you know, the delivery of other products has changed a lot, but the delivery of education hasn't. Now, in some ways, at the core of successful education are the close personal relationships between a teacher and a student. But one of the responses to increasing cost is to have larger classes, which is, of course, undermining that close relationship. The second problem is if we are going to be facing the problem of access, we want to be able to take into our schools students of heterogeneous background. And if we have large classes, that will we will be less successful in providing education. It's not just a question of admitting them, it's actually making sure that we can deliver an education that is responsive to their backgrounds. So what I think we have to do is to think a lot more about the structuring our education. So as an example, I think schools like Columbia, Amherst, need to have many more smaller classes the first 2 years to adapt, to be able to deliver the kind of education necessary for a heterogeneous population coming in. But then we have to think about how we can use technology to supplement some of the conventional teaching. And there have been big advances in technology. Younger people, what I said before is, younger people are used to technology in a way that some of the older, you know, we resist reading, some of us resist reading a newspaper on the Kindle. Young people, they don't like paper. And it's good for their forests besides, but they are much more adaptive to these new technologies. So it seems to me that as we focus on cost, focus on efficiency, focus on the importance of access, I think we need to re-examine the whole issue of the delivery of our education, and we have to re-examine the content as we think about the issue of designing an education system that is good for their long life after school, but also gets them a job in the short run in a very competitive marketplace. Okay?
Okay, we try to have this be as conversational as possible. So just questions for Joe, yes. I suppose so.
Okay, thank you, Professor Stiglitz. And thanks for Professor Bollinger for hosting this event. I have two quick questions. The first one is about the social cost of the youth bulge. And what's the role of the right information or precise information on reducing such a cost? If you could elaborate on this, please. The second question is, you said that the problem is cutting the aggregate demand. And you know that we have at least 2 schools regarding how to get out of the recession. Some of the countries who suffer from chronic budget deficits, they cut aggregate demand and also they expand or they use expansion monetary policy. So they have mixed tight fiscal policy and expansion monetary policy. Do you think that this is a wrong or it's not the right policy to get rid of recession? Thank you.
Okay. Well, the second one is an easier question for me to answer because it's just, the answer is that in Europe and America today, there is no scope for monetary policy. So there isn't, in normal times, you can have this mix between monetary and fiscal policy. You can have fiscal contraction and monetary easing, and that can stimulate the economy. Right now, with interest rates at 0, it's very hard to get more monetary easing. QE2 didn't work. It caused a lot of disturbances in some of the emerging markets. Important point here in the nature of globalization. Most of our theory, most of our models focus on a closed economy. And in a closed economy, you increase the money supply, that leads to more credit in the country, and that stimulates the economic activity. That's no longer true in our global open economy because the United States lends more, but it lends to, say, companies. Say the Fed opens up the spigots and money goes into some American companies. But American companies are global. And so what do they say? Where is the best place in the world to spend our money? And what have they decided? Not in the United States. The best place to spend the money is Brazil, China, India, the economies that are growing. So it's not, so the monetary policy is not going to work. Now, the other argument that is sometimes put is that lowering the fiscal deficit will restore confidence. There is no evidence that that kind of restoration of confidence will ever lead to more investment and higher GDP. But cutting back leads to lower GDP, and that undermines confidence. There is one mechanism that countries can use, and that is to raise taxes and raise spending in a balanced budget way. And that's something called the balanced budget multiplier. And if you raise your taxes the right way and spend the right way, it can be quite large. Unfortunately, a lot of the discussion in the United States is to cut taxes and cut spending, which is having exactly the negative effect. Now, on your first question on the social cost of the youth bulge, what I tried to emphasize is it really depends on how we respond to that youth bulge. If we fail to create the jobs then the cost can be absolutely enormous because it will lead to unrest, it will social disturbances of all kinds. If, on the other hand, we are able to educate all these young people and get them jobs, you'll wind up with a younger labor force and a more dynamic labor force. So it could actually have a positive effect. Now, one of the final points is that the sectors that, if you have a youth bulge, the thing that you need to expand is education. In most countries, education is primarily the responsibility of government in one way or another, especially if you want access, fair access. And that means government policies that are cutting back are working exactly in the opposite direction to the restructuring you need and the education that you need to respond to the youth bulge.
Let's use the microphone in the back. Michael first, and then, sorry. And then we'll bring a mic to you, rather than stand up. So that, I mean, people don't have to come up to the mic. There's a mic coming, and it'll just...
Thank you very much. Joe, thank you for those really informative and insightful remarks about the challenges that are especially faced by universities in the US and Europe. I think it's directed right here to us at Columbia, so congratulations that we should be hearing all of that. My question is how much of that translates to other parts of the world that are 50 or 70% rural, where there is in some cases, very little agricultural productivity, which means that agriculture is not providing the demand that it could otherwise provide for the economy or the stable and growing food supplies that countries need. What role could universities play in that kind of an environment where the real challenge is rural and uneducated agricultural labor? Can universities play a role there, or is it beyond their reach? I'm interested in what you might say.
Yeah, what I try to hint at is that not only should our elementary and secondary education in these economies be more focused on the reality that most of the people will be in the rural sector, but also the universities. Next year in the United States, we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the passage of the Morrill Act, which created our state agricultural land grant colleges and universities. These universities, Cornell, Texas A&M, Iowa, all the key universities around the country played a vital role in increasing productivity in agriculture and leading to the transition from an agriculture economy, which the United States was in the 19th century, into a modern economy. So very strongly, our universities, agricultural universities can play a very important role. In particular, not only do they play did our agricultural universities play an important role in training, they also played in training university people, they also interacted with the communities that they were located in. And through what we call it extension services that increased productivity in the areas around where they're located. And so it was both directly and indirectly that they had a huge effect on our economy.
Yes, and then back in the corner over there.
Usama Ibrahim, Alexandria, Egypt. You mentioned the difference between the skill-based education versus the liberal education. And actually, in developing countries like Egypt, we have a third type of education, which is a single-track education that leads to an abundance of university graduates that are not fit for the market, actually. So in Egypt, for example, we have thousands of graduates of the commerce school. And on the other hand, I've been involved in many companies that when we need to hire somebody, we have to rehabilitate him from the start. We have to give him a different type of education that would fit him or allow him to join the job. So what's your advice for us? Should we concentrate more on skill-based, try to involve these students or early postgrads to join the market while they are still in their education phase, so we can make use of their force in the working community?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that there are two aspects that I'd like to focus on. For a modern economy, there has to be what we sometimes call lifelong learning, that the world is always changing, and they will not, if they're trained for a job today and they don't learn, they will become obsolete. You know, it used to be that people would have a job for a whole lifetime, but now they move from job to job, and that requires more and more skills. So what we need to do is two things. One, have institutions that help provide that lifelong learning. You know, they help have the, you know, in medicine, you require people to keep getting retrained. So we have to think of institutions that provide lifelong learning, but in our universities, we have to think about how do we prepare them for this process of lifelong learning. So that's where particularly liberal arts education is very important, because it's the mindsets, it's the learning skills that are going to be critical going forward. But the second thing is that we have to help them get immersed in the labor market. We sometimes talk about those as soft skills. And some of what happens in the universities may be counter to that. You know, for instance, in some universities, we give in to our students who don't like to get up before 10 o'clock in the morning. And that's sort of pampering them. When they get into the labor market, they don't have a choice of saying, I'll get up at 10 o'clock in the morning. You know, if they're told to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, they have to be at work every day at 8 o'clock. I'm kidding a little bit, but not much. The point I'm making is that we have to do a better job of that transition from education to the workplace. And part of that transition will be apprenticeships, internships, various kinds of programs that get them more immersed. So the bottom line is we have to do more of both. We have to do more of the liberal arts, but also more of the things that we need to do to get them easier immersed into the labor market.
Eva Buscher, UN. Two questions for you. I was really struck by your comment about changing the structure of, you know, how we teach in terms of smaller classes in the first couple of years, larger classes perhaps. And in that context, I wonder, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about use of adjuncts, use of graduate teaching, and some of the difficulties with that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. And then the second question, you know, at the UN, one of the things we're finding is that for many of the global challenges that we're facing, what we need is, in a sense, systems thinking, complex thinking. So it speaks to an interdisciplinary background. Now, you've talked about the importance of liberal arts education. That tends to focus more on linear thinking. And I'm wondering whether we need to be thinking about the core that we're providing our undergraduates. Do we have to be changing the, you know, going away from sort of the basic English, economics, political science into more interdisciplinary types of courses?
Yeah, both of those good questions. On the first, let me give you an example of at least one kind of discussion that's going on in some places. There are big improvements in online education. There was one course that I believe that was put online at Stanford and had 150,000 students sign up for it. Just amazing. And I think something like 50,000 or 100,000 actually completed the course. And you could imagine working very hard to develop, if you have that many students, that you could put a lot of resources into developing the best course that you could imagine for those students. But at the same time, I want to go back to what I said. A lot of education is interpersonal interaction. So one of the ideas that is being talked about in some circles for online education is having online education, but then having centers where people meet with adjuncts, with people maybe not of the same stature as those people putting on the online course, but can provide some of that face-to-face interaction, answering the questions. So I think, in the same way that we already in our universities mix professors and TAs, but to try to do it more and more thoughtfully and more leveraging than we've done in the past. The issue of interdisciplinary work is something I meant to talk about, ran out of time, but let me talk about two aspects of that. One of them is a lot of the most exciting work is interdisciplinary. And one of the reasons it's exciting is because, as you say, it's nonlinear, that you have people thinking one way, confronting people thinking another way, and that interaction between different thought processes stimulates sparks and leads to advances. At the same time, the reason we have disciplines is because they provide discipline, that the disciplines have a particular rigor to them. So one of the challenges is going to be providing that, maintaining the discipline of the disciplines and the excitement of multidisciplinary interaction. And I see that as one of the challenges facing universities going forward. For undergraduates, I went to Amherst College, where when I went through my freshman and sophomore year, we had a core curriculum where we had almost no choice. The whole curriculum was designed as a package, interaction between math, physics, between English, humanities. Unfortunately, in the, I don't want to say libertarian era of the 70s, that kind of core curriculum was viewed as excessively constraining. And one of the few universities that has kept the idea of a core curriculum is Columbia. And I think it's a very important part of the education, and I think the students here really come to value it. It's part of a distinctive aspect of the Columbia education. I think going forward, I'd like to see more universities and colleges providing at least an option of that kind of a core curriculum that obviously changing. You know, the world today is not the same as it was 100 years ago. Liberal arts education today is different from what was 100 years ago. We want to talk about globalization. We want to talk about, a whole variety of things that are different from what we did then. But the challenge of trying to create that kind of core curriculum, a community within the college of people from various disciplines interacting, seems to me one of the real challenges facing universities today. Well, you should weigh in on some of this if you have a...
I'd be happy to, but I think people really want to hear from you.
You made allusion to, in your presentation, to the issue of controlling costs. And this is something which is really troubling for most vice chancellors or presidents of universities in developing countries, especially the publicly supported universities. I think this issue arises especially in these universities because government fixes fees. I believe they do so because they want to increase access to higher education, but the negative is it affects the quality of education provided by these universities. What would you suggest we do in these countries?
Well, one of the things I guess I suggest you do is to lobby the government and to try to explain what I've been trying to explain, which is that success in dealing with the youth bulge, success in dealing with the future of the economy is going to require a high-quality labor force. And you can't get a high-quality labor force, competitive labor force, in today's economy without a good education system. That nothing in life is free. Economists say there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that means it's going to cost, particularly if you want to have access. And I would, again, try to emphasize why I think access is so important. It's a fundamental value, but even if you didn't think of it as a fundamental value, if you want political and economic and social stability, and using your using well your most important resource, which is your human resources, you have to have access for everybody. So it seems to me that there is a compelling argument that the universities can make. And in return, I think universities have to show that they are being responsive to the needs of society and are trying to make efforts to become more efficient. They're not just doing things business as usual, that they are trying to get their costs down, and they're trying to think about how to be more efficient and gain access. So it seems to me that that's the main thing you can do. The other avenue is other sources of revenue. That is to say, adult education, other way revenue raisers. The universities produce lots of things that the markets value highly. And in some cases, if there are no other avenues of money, that may be something one has to think about more.
Joe, let me ask a question coming at it from a different angle, drawing on your great knowledge and expertise. One of the things universities, I think the thing we do other than teach students best is to try to think and understand the world. So we really devote ourselves to trying to figure out sort of how the world works and how it might work. And it's also the case that it seems like we do not understand the global economy. And I say that in part because we've gone through two colossal crises in the last decade. And if you care about employment, as everybody in this room does, it would seem like you really want to make sure that we understand what's going on here. The reason why I emphasize ignorance too is because I recently heard a person who very high up in the central bank here say, we understood individual banks to a certain extent, but we have to work harder at understanding them. We clearly failed, in a deep understanding. But the bigger problem is we don't understand the interconnections of banks. We don't understand the interconnections of the global economy. And in fact, Basel has just set up a new committee on understanding global finance as an acknowledgement that this thing that's been created is being created and will continue remains something of a mystery. And I wonder, as you think about something like this youth bulge, you can approach it by saying, for purposes of dealing with this massive problem, we understand pretty much all we need to do. We got to figure out how to implement policies. It's not a matter of deep research. Or you could say, it really is a matter of deep research, or it is as well. And these are major questions that the universities in this room and other universities should devote themselves more to than we do. And, you know, this is your world. I mean, you are as knowledgeable about what's happening in the world as anybody on the planet. To what extent is it ignorance, the fact that we just don't understand things, that's a key part of dealing with the problems that are here?
Well, I guess I put it somewhere in between. I think the real danger is what I see is complacency by some of the people who think that they understood things and didn't. That's the real danger. And there were a lot of people, I won't name them, who fall in that category.
Yeah.
We understand some of the, let me say, we understand some of the problems, and well before the crisis, you know, I don't want to sound immodest, but I had written about some of these issues of bank interdependence. Bruce Greenwald at the business school and I had done a book where we talked about how you could have bankruptcy cascades and how a problem in one bank could lead to another.
Yep.
That was not taken on board at all by the central banks. You know, they really ignored lines of thought that were outside of their narrow lens. What are the implications for universities? Well, it seems to me, first, I think we ought to try to inculcate a spirit of modesty, that, you know, the world is complex. We understand some things, but we shouldn't be overconfident. And the most important thing that I think when I was in college that I was taught is the most important thing is to ask the right questions. And part of asking right questions is delineating what do we know. And you know, there was this old expression that the real danger is the things that we know that aren't true. So let me give you an example. I raised in my talk one of the issues of monetary policy in a world of open economy, where we have expansionary monetary policy, but it doesn't affect the U.S.
Yep.
That's an example of, you know, monetary policy in a globalized world is very different than monetary policy in a closed economy.
Yeah.
That has not been very well widely yet analyzed. So that's the kind of question that in the university and in our students we ought to be raising, even if we don't fully know the full answer. It at least alerts them to thinking about things in a slightly different way, and hopefully encourages research. Now, I want to go back to the previous question about how do you sell governments on why they should be supporting universities. One of the ways you do it is to say, look, there are these important questions that we don't yet fully know the answer to. And if we have to rely simply on the received wisdom, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We still may make mistakes, but at least we should be on guard, aware of the things that might go wrong.
Yep. Well, we're at the end of this, unfortunately. I want to say two things. The first is that I will do everything that Joe recommended that we do, except for one, and that is to take on the students and have them go to class before 10. I mean, I'm smart enough to know that's one you don't do. Everything else I'll fix here. The second is you can see why it's always such a pleasure and a learning experience to be with Joe Stiglitz, and we're very, very grateful to him for being with us this morning. Thanks, Joe.